Meet my dear friend, Jenny Wright, Executive Director of North Adams Partnership, retired artist and musician, and forever contributor to community by being a collaborator holistic synergist. In other words, she involves everybody to make sure they're playing the notes that need to be played to make the systems better than ever for the people they serve. Without further pause, here's Jenny. So here we are, Jenny Wright. You typically land in the space and say, hey, I'm so glad you're here, and all kinds of really pleasing, positive compliments that you pay Benin and us, me, Jordan even probably, I would imagine, because the space that we've opened up here on the campus of MASS MoCA is really invitational. And I appreciate you saying yes to the invitation to find out more about you, your life, your work, how you wound up at the executive director helm of North Adams Partnership. Mm-hmm. Okay. Also known as NAP, right?
By others, not by me.
Yeah,
NAP seems to allude to a certain slow, lazy quality I don't want to associate with the organization. Yeah. I go with the partnership.
Yeah,
if you really have to abbreviate. No, not yet anyway. Right. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, we don't want to always live in a world of acronyms and shortcuts. So as you know, this podcast is really about learning from a career pathways, story pathing standpoint, how you ended up where you are. But we always have to start with our featured guest explaining what their role is and for what organization. So the microphone in front of you is yours, Jenny Wright. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Jenny Wright, and I am, in fact, the executive director of the North Adams Partnership. I was appointed executive director in November, I believe. So I'm new to the organization, but it was actually founded back in 2010 by a group of local leaders who were really interested in advancing economic development of downtown North Adams and trying to strengthen the connections between downtown, MASS MoCA, and MCLA.
Okay. So for folks who don't know all of those more abbreviations, MCLA, not UCLA, MCLA.
Correct.
Is a school. MASS MoCA, of course, the museum. Can you just give, almost like pretend you're scaffolding this as an educator and give us the glossary of terms and maybe a visualization or a triangulation of these organizations?
So MCLA is the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and it's located right in downtown North Adams, which one would not necessarily know from coming to downtown sort of casually. MASS MoCA is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, of course, where this studio is located. And the partnership is right between the two. I have a teeny tiny little office at 37 Main Street. Okay. So that's sort of the triangulation of energies that we're working with.
Wow. And the founder spirit, when they said these business leaders and probably CBO leaders and community leaders, and stop me if I'm mischaracterizing any of this, they wanted to bring, to cohere, to kind of gel those organizations in the spirit of community development?
Yeah, absolutely. And so members of, the leadership team from MCLA, from MASS MoCA, as well as from the city were part of this founding group. Mm-hmm. And they really wanted to ensure that the success of MASS MoCA equated to the success of downtown North Adams, which equated to the success of MCLA, and to sort of connect those three entities in a way that elevated everyone.
Okay. This sounds like a pretty noble cause.
I'd say so. I'd say so for sure. And again, that's really what it amounted to. It was a group of folks who cared deeply about the city. And, in light of everything that has happened in North Adams, including urban renewal, the departure of Sprague, which was the major employer for decades, really wanted to do something intentional and active to help activate the downtown.
Do you think there was someone in that founding group who said, hey, we don't want X to happen anymore, or Y? Is it because of scars or jabs to the chin or
So I can guess.
skinned knees, perhaps?
Is it my place to guess? I don't know. The founding of this organization predates me and my arrival to North Adams, but it's pretty obvious to me the harms that were caused by the sequence of events that happened, from the 50s to the 80s, starting with urban renewal.
And Jenny, not everybody knows what urban renewal is, right? Sounds like a good thing. Hey, we're going to renew urban life.
Doesn't it sound great? It sounds so positive.
Quite well marketed. I think the naming is lovely if that alone. But what really happens behind the label of that?
That was, in fact, the narrative. Urban renewal was a national movement to remove the old, essentially. So in North Adams, we were looking at blighted buildings, tenement buildings that might have been dangerous to people. But instead of, going in with a scalpel and removing what was harmful, urban renewal removed, half of the downtown, half of the south side of Main Street, and 205 families, I think it was, and 35 businesses in the Center Street corridor in order to construct the Route 2 overpass. The goal was really to make it easier for car travel. It was to make it easier for folks to drive across the country, transport goods across country in trucks by building highways. And oftentimes those highways went through neighborhoods. Almost always those neighborhoods were poor, neighborhoods of color. And now, sort of one of the reasons behind the relaunch of this organization, I'm going to skip ahead just a second, is that the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed a few years ago that dedicated a lot of money, $1 trillion, to repairing some of those harms through a program called the Reconnecting Communities program.
Okay. Wow, this is a great lesson. Wow, this is fantastic.
Well, I'm brand new to it, too. So this is not something, I just want to, this is a caveat to the whole conversation that I have no specific background or training in urban renewal or traffic engineering or bridge engineering or community development, for that matter.
So how did you say yes to this? Or why did you say yes to this? I mean, what was the motivational spark that, you were previously a communications person, director,
training is actually in graphic design.
Graphic design.
So I have a BFA in graphic design. I studied at the Corcoran in DC. It's what I did for 20 years. Then I had a job in communications, which tended to be where a design department generally would live, especially in a nonprofit.
Okay.
So I had a communications role. This would have been 2020 through 2022. And it was during that time that MASS MoCA's founding director retired. We now have Christy Edmonds in the leadership role. And the moment she arrived, this Reconnecting Communities program was launched. And people just started coming out of the woodwork.
Good timing.
Getting in touch with her. Well, who knew, right? Because people are calling the director of an art museum and saying, hey, we should really do something about this bridge. And I remember one day Christy came into my office and she was like, does the museum usually get involved in bridge and infrastructure initiatives in the city? But we both really started looking at this legislation, and it really was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And because in both MASS MoCA's planning studies and in the city's planning studies, over the last few decades, the overpass was identified again and again and again as a major barrier to connectivity.
And for folks who can't visualize what's outside of our doors, essentially, and around the corner, it's, how would you explain it? The large overpass. I mean, you're on a 2-lane road, one going east, one going west, right? And suddenly you have a chance to veer off to the right or go over the overpass. And the overpass turns into 4 lanes and sidewalks to get to a town of 10,000?
12.5.
12.5.
Yeah.
Okay, 12.5.
There is a lot to unpack with this single piece of concrete.
Well, for those who cannot see this, if you're not subscribing via video, there are lots of facial contortions, which I think we don't need a medical professional to attend to, but I think it's just an emotional reaction to
Well, the bottom line is that it goes from a 2-lane road, which is Route 2, It expands to 4 lanes just at the overpass, and then it goes back to 2 lanes. And it goes parallel to Main Street. So what it's doing is getting you out of North Adams as fast as humanly possible. It's bypassing the downtown. And you can imagine that this was done for a reason. Nobody wants trucks driving through downtown. But if you look at other communities in the region, even in the Berkshires, state roads go straight through downtowns from, Stockbridge to Pittsfield to Williamstown. And while certainly there is at times congestion, this just seems to me when I look at it, and I drive under it every day, it just feels like a statement.
Well, it's certainly an illustration of allocating money to do something, right?
Sure.
And then seeing where it begins and ends, literally from the beginning of the artifact to the end of it.
Exactly.
It also, in systems thinking, that would be a critical path to the easiest way through if you were a truck. But, of course, I'm not trying to retrospectively analyze the traffic patterns that were observed or worked into this analysis. And sometimes the math isn't so deep. It's just, here's the money, build the thing where you'd like the thing. And then, you'll have the thing, So this is a little bit of a design thing still, though, for you, even though it's, it's community development, it's civil engineering, it's urban renewal take 2 done right. I'm not quite sure. But so where did this all start? Let's go. So this is the back in time, take that mental flight with me, Jenny Wright.
Oh boy.
Where did you grow up and how did you play? How did you play, Jenny Wright?
Oh, how did I play? That's a really good question.
How did you play?
So I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a small city called Altoona, okay. Pennsylvania. It's on the west side of central Pennsylvania. How did I play? That's a great question. I read constantly, obsessively. So I would say that between digging in my yard for worms, which was my second favorite activity, I was pretty literally obsessed with books.
With books.
Yeah. And as I got a little older, that really started to become an escape, as I think it is for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Was this modeled for you? Did you see other people read along, or was it escape at the onset, or just...
Well, one of the things... So my parents were divorced. I don't know how deep we want to go here, but...
You're in charge.
Setting
Jenny,
the table here. So my mom raised me by herself. And so I was, it was the 80s. We were all latchkey kids. You just spend a lot of time alone. And, when you're bored and you've seen all the reruns of the Smurfs, I would just go to my mom's bookcase. And the first book that I read, that I remember really having a super profound impact on me, was The Shining.
Oh my gosh.
Which I discovered in 2nd or 3rd grade. And we lived in an apartment that was converted to from a series of bedrooms to, kitchen, dining room, living room, but the doors were still there. So in our dining room, we had 2 doors that would swing in and out. And I sat behind the door. There was this tiny little triangle for myself with this book. And I read it in a weekend.
Oh my gosh.
And I just became obsessed. Obsessed with just exactly that, sitting behind that door.
Was that your favorite spot afterward?
That was definitely my favorite spot, for sure.
Okay.
It just felt safe. It felt like it was mine. It felt like, no one was going to bother me there. And I could just disappear into these stories.
I mean, The Shining isn't,
Oh, I had no idea.
A Mary Oliver poem.
I had no idea what I was getting into. What was interesting, though, is that what drew me to that specific edition is that it was published in the mid-'70s. It's a silver cover, just solid silver, and there's a little illustration, a very simple illustration of a boy, and he has no face. It's just hair,
I know this one.
Silhouette, and no face. And I was so drawn to that. I thought, what is this? And I opened it and I didn't stop for 72 hours.
And the cover, it's not metallic, but it
is a little, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So strange you would pick this book.
Yep. That was the one. And then I became obsessed with Stephen King.
Okay.
And I got into it when I was the same age as the kids in it. So I was in 5th grade. I was 10, going through with them everything that they were going through. And these stories just changed me. I really felt like I knew these people. And, being an only child of divorced parents gets a little lonely when you're 10. And I was alone in the house a lot. And I just became best friends with these people. And I just wanted to be around them all the time. And so that's what I did.
So you felt like you met them.
100%. And he's such a good character. Every one of his stories comes from the point of view of the characters. It's all about character. And I just connected with them.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? It's sort of like weirdly emotional to think about yourself as a young kid. At times I think of, taking my BMX bike and escaping the house and going down, like cutting through, I don't know if we're related here, but I'd be cutting through cemeteries, and on the other side of the cemetery, there'd be broken bottles and then like some sand dunes, and then you'd go down the sand dunes and across the railroad tracks to Robin Hollow, and that's where the broken wall was, where you would go swimming if you were 13 and above, but I was 9 and I was not going to try to mix with those older kids, and there's a sense of, exploration and grounded reality that, we have this uniquely human experience that we're going through, right? Which is very different than the digital one. And despite technology and how beautiful it is and the meta glasses and how they'll eventually have a holographic sort of transference of an image of someone in Arizona who you want in the conversation now, there's just something about ultimate freedom that I can pick my boundary. I can organize myself to go this direction, bike, book, whatever.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. That is completely in alignment with my lived experience. But at the same time, all I heard from every adult in my life was, you're going to go blind if you keep watching that television. Oh. You got to, get away from that television. Stop reading those nasty books. They're going to rot your brain. I mean, there was just a lot. That was just the message that we got. It's a generational thing where we pick a villain that's going to ruin our children. And then that's the thing that's,
So you heard your eyes will rot out.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, I would sit in the summer and watch TV for 8 solid hours.
Was it this? It's a long time.
Yeah, we all did.
Well, yeah, you're an only child and all that.
Exactly.
We'll take that into
Explains
consideration.
a lot.
It explains so much. So much more, I bet. But so did you, was it the creativity or the creativity and exploration are different, right? People interchange them, but like creativity is conjuring something anew. Exploration, going into uncharted territory, can help you conjure something that's more informed by the exploration. So they kind of balance each other as psychological opposites in terms of competencies or cognitive mental muscles. But even when you do it, like, I could not look for anything and do something and create something, or I could create a sound. But I haven't explored all types of sounds. So I can just create it like out of a conch shell, for instance. I could just blow and not think about all the ways I could blow and put my lips. Like, do I tighten them? Do I make them like a trumpet sound? Do I vibrate them? Do I spit? And once I explore, then I can pick the sound that I might want to create and then explore it a little bit more based on that creation. So it's a little bit of a side lecture on 2 competencies, but do you feel like you were exploring, this is just to set the question, I guess, right? Is that, do you feel like you were exploring or that you were creating a world of your own, or were you exploring something that was created and that just like dazzled you?
So that's an interesting question because I've thought about this a lot. And when I was a kid, I could always draw.
Oh.
But I drew what I saw. So photorealistic, like there's a thing in front of me, I sit down with a pencil, I draw the thing, it looks like the thing, full stop.
What did you draw?
Anything. Inanimate object, my own hand holding the paper that I was drawing on. I had this fantastic illustrated Encyclopedia Britannica of animals that I was obsessed with. And I would just go through and I would draw all the animals. But the thing was, I didn't ever feel like I was creating. I felt like I was exercising, or it was a discipline that I was developing. And so when I got to school and the feedback that I got was, oh, you're such an amazing artist. Look at that. It's a rabbit. I see it. And I would push back and I would be like, well, I'm making my picture look like the thing that I'm looking at. There was something about me that felt, I don't know if I was being like disingenuous or dishonest by accepting this.
Well, you're still creating, but you're creating through discernment. And the discernment is coming from a model, and the model is the thing in front of you that's already the picture. Right. So you're not really imagining, but you're still creating, because conversation could be creative. Right?
Sure. And I was definitely creating something new, but there was something that I really wanted to be clear about to the grownups in my life, was that like, this is work. This is a skill that I am developing. Look, the first picture I drew didn't look exactly like this rabbit. The third picture I drew does. And this is the one that I'm turning in.
You sound like you're kind of hard on yourself.
An only child of divorced parents? Why would you ever think that,
Dennis?
Dennis?
Who's obsessed with books, who sat in a triangle for days and weeks, whose eyes nearly rotted out? I can't imagine. Why would you think that?
But there was something about that, and it also activated a different part of my mind, I think. The thing that lit me up was learning.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't just, it was anything. I would go to my grandparents' house all the time, and they had the OG Encyclopedia Britannica. So like an entire bookcase dedicated to a set of encyclopedias that they bought from some guy who showed up at their house.
By the way, I have the bookcase that my grandparents...
Of course you do.
With the yeah.
Treasure it always.
It is the best. The first Google.
Exactly. And that's what I did. I would just sit there and I would just go down the row and I would read them. And I wasn't going to retain everything, but just there was something about that process of learning something new that connected to something. And as I got older, I realized that where I felt just electrified in that state of flow where you don't know what time it is or what time of day it is when I was learning something new and like applying it directly, whether it was learning something new and immediately having a conversation with somebody about it where I could sort of practice this new vocabulary and use these new terms.
So you're a converter. You just, you apply. Yeah. Convert. Yeah.
And I just wanted to keep doing that. But that's what was always confusing to me. And I got a little resentful about that in school.
What do you mean, defensive, like, or mad, or you kind of?
No, just this sort of, again, I could draw representational things. I studied classical piano.
Okay.
If I sat down in front of a keyboard and somebody just said, hey, riff, I would have had no idea what on earth to do with my hands.
Okay.
But I could play something that I knew in my bones, memorize it, and play it exactly the way that it was intended to sound by Chopin or Rachmaninoff or whatever.
Do you think that this is amazing? I mean, we're discovering all of the talents of Jenny Wright. So you studied formally piano.
I did.
And do you think that, I'm going to give you a description. I'd love your reaction to it. Do you think that you explored music and discerned notes and pressure on the keys and pace, right, of playing and maybe even variations to perfect a performance?
For sure.
Okay. So would it be okay to say like you're a little bit of a theorist, perfectionist, that you explore things to get them better?
1,000%.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes total sense now as a fully formed adult looking back and saying, obviously, that's what I was doing. But
welcome to your fully formed version.
I shouldn't say that. I don't feel fully formed. But looking back, just looking at how I drew and the way that I drew, I didn't doodle. I've never made a doodle in my life, but I have a million birds that look exactly like the birds that I, was looking at when I drew them.
Okay. Do you like organizing and putting things together, assembling, or do you like understanding how things work?
I love understanding how things work conceptually. Okay. Organizing, I like for things to be organized, but
So I should correct myself.
Oh, boy.
When I think, when I think of the definition of organization, I don't think neatly placed. I think
Sure.
how things work.
I like to understand how something works before I do it or talk about it.
Okay.
I want to understand. It has to make logical sense to me before I can talk about it or before I give myself permission to say something about it or talk to somebody else about it.
Okay.
But in terms of organization, I want to believe that that's how I think, but just based on evidence of how I set up my files on my computer or the way that things are organized on my nightstand as opposed to my husband's nightstand, I don't know that that's the word.
Okay. Well, I think we kind of, how it is in the Northeast and in North America in particular. We kind of change language, right? Like a little bit, like primally, like you should, like if you understand complexity and you can break things down to be simple, that's organization. If you understand something simple and how it's nested in complexity, that's organization. But, back to the your eyes are going to burn out, the statement, we would say organized is neat and you understand how things should be stacked on your nightstand, and that kind of BS, which is not BS if you're trying to probably raise a kiddo and teach them some things, but maybe BS if you're the kiddo, So you're in this position now, but you used to play by reading and the piano. Did that come into play when you were really young?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was probably 7 when I started taking lessons, but where it started is that my grandfather one year bought me a set of tapes that were narrated over classical music, and each tape was about the life of a different composer. So all the greats, Mozart, Chopin,
How old were you?
Tchaikovsky. I was probably 5 or 6.
Wow, 5 or 6?
Mm-hmm. And so I would listen to them before I went to sleep. And it just was relaxing to me. I'd put one tape, my mom would put a tape in, and it was the auto reverse. So it would play the one side and then it would click and play the other side. So I listened to those every night. So by the time I started taking lessons, I knew the work. I knew the greatest hits. And I felt a certain, I guess, amount of ownership over those. I felt like they were mine because they had put me to sleep for years and years.
How many years did you listen before you started really playing?
Probably 3. I guess I started lessons in 3rd grade, so I was probably 8. So 5 to 8, I'm listening to and absorbing these tapes just to fall asleep at night.
Just like 1,000 reps.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So by the time I started hearing these pieces in the context of a music lesson, I knew them. They were part of my DNA. I knew when a quarter rest was as opposed to how, I just knew I knew what it should sound like. And I had this opportunity to produce that. And that was exciting to me. And that's why I never really, I never gravitated towards improvisation or jazz because these songs had meant so much to me as a child. I wanted to be in a position to study them and understand them, and then to be able to do that same thing and to achieve that.
I'm thinking about how you drew.
Yeah.
Too. It's very similar, right?
Exactly.
You would look at a realistic version of an animal and duplicate it, and then do variation until you're like, 3rd rabbit.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
But you had many more reps listening, hearing, doing that audio loop.
And the thing that was different is that I knew what it was supposed to sound like. So that's where the perfectionist came in.
Okay.
So on one hand, my soul left my body when I felt like I got it right. I didn't have to, I could keep my eyes closed. The music would just go through me. When I didn't get it right, it felt horrible. I felt like a failure. I felt like I was never going to get it. So that's the sort of, for me, that as the kind of kid that I was, that was the danger of combining that perfectionism that was my tendency with the very high bar of trying to note for note reproduce, a Rachmaninoff concerto or something like that. So, it was.
When did you think you got it right for the first time? Let's say a rock concerto.
So it would have been the Prelude in C sharp minor, which I played for my recital in 6th grade. I don't feel like I knocked it out of the park in my recital, but I know that I could, because there were times at my house where I just lost all sense of where I was, because I knew that I was in it, and I knew that like I was doing the thing that Rachmaninoff wanted you to do.
Yeah. It's like that tendency field that rips through you and says like, I'm just flow.
Yeah.
Which is no mistake why Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls it flow, right?
Right.
As your skills rise up to the challenges in front of you, you feel that deeper engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually seek as human beings these opportunities to evolve ourselves, even though we might be kicking dirt on the way to the batter's box at times,
right.
or to the piano bench, as it were. So, okay, so gifted musician, a non-artist, perfectionistic, theorist, perfectionist. You're thinking about school at some point, high school, college. You're like, what was high school like en route to college for you?
Well, I'm going to have to go there. There was a time when, because of, perfectionism, I think tends to do this to people. It was the 80s. I was a latchkey kid. It was a small town, but I started to go down a path towards self-destruction at one point. And I realized that I could keep going in that direction, or I could make some significant changes.
Just not doing the things you should do for yourself.
Yeah, it was going to be a short path with an abrupt end, right? So I recognized this, and
did you get help recognizing that, or did you just? I did.
Fortunately, I had help. I had support, but ultimately,
not common in the 80s, by the way, to get a lot.
This was support. By then. This was the 90s.
90s, okay.
Yeah, this was the late 90s.
Okay, The Cure and all that stuff being played. Right?
Well, and all of our idols were kind of all dying of overdoses and suicides in the early 90s, and I felt like, again, this is all 2020 hindsight.
Cobain,
yeah, looking back. That was when everything that was really exciting and new about the late 80s, early 90s started to become part of the sort of corporate machine. Like MTV, no longer cool by the late 90s. We had this thing called heroin chic that high fashion, served us by the late 90s. So there was some dark times just in terms of being a young person growing up then.
And you were in Pennsylvania, same space, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I realized that I needed to make some significant changes. And I thought, this has to be something that I can actually do.
How old were you?
I was probably 19, 20.
Okay. So you were in college or about to go to college or thinking about college?
I was not thinking about
college at all. Okay.
I was of college age. I was not there yet.
Knew some people who did that path. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll call it a gap year. We'll call it a couple of character building years that I had between high school and college. But I made this decision and realized that I had to create concrete steps that I could achieve. And I think that my training came into play here at some point. Yeah. Because this was not about feel your feels and go with your gut. And my gut led me to places that I did not want to go back to. So I really had to impose on myself discipline that felt at the moment like this is it. You're like, you got to nail this, or this is the only path.
And you knew the stakes were really, really high at that point.
Yeah, for sure. So it was
because you realized, or because somebody said, "Hey, kid, what are you doing?"
Well, there was a whole lot of that too, but I definitely realized, and I made a choice. I made a choice to do the work.
Remember when you made that choice? Like when you said, like you got to get into that. You got to lock in here.
It's funny. I don't remember a single moment at all. There was one, however, where my piano teacher, Rick Cornett, approached me and he said, "You're better than this," and then he just walked away.
Ooh.
And it was so harsh, but it was exactly what I needed to hear, because this was a person that had always treated me like a full person, always treated me with, respect and had a very high bar for me. And when he said that, I was like, shit, he's right. Like, I'm better than this. But
That's the
how to
moment.
move forward.
That's a moment, though, right? Like in terms of waking you up. That's a moment.
Yeah,
that's
this
a moment.
was early 1998, and
Okay.
so I said, okay, how on earth do I do this? How does one move forward? I have no concept for how to function. So I was like, well, I'm going to get up in the morning. Step one. What time? Let's say 8:30. So I got up at 8:30, and then I was like, okay, now I'm going to make my bed. And I started coming up with these extremely straightforward, achievable tasks, but it was like a life preserver. It was like, I am going to do these things with my time.
Did you make lists?
Oh, yes. That was where I discovered the power of having a list. Because again, if I just left it up to chance or I left it up to what I felt like, I couldn't trust that impulse, right? So I made lists and I followed them. And, I started thinking, where can I go? What are some spaces that I can go outside of the house where I'm not going to, bump into somebody that I know or fall into some sort of old pattern? And the first place that came to mind was the public library. So I went to the Altoona Public Library, and I don't think I've ever told them this. I've never written a letter. I'm going to do that immediately following this conversation. But I can say with confidence that the Altoona Public Library saved my life. And I remember the day I went there. And of course, I'd been to the library before. I mean, I was there all the time as a child, but this was the first time that I made the decision to drive myself to the library. And as soon as I walked in, there was this little poster on the wall, and it said, "What matters most is how well we walk through the fire." And it was a quote by Charles Bukowski. And I looked at it and I thought, I like that.
Wow. I mean,
that makes sense to me. So I walked up to the front desk and I looked the part of, whatever, a 90s street urchin that can't be trusted. And so
street urchin, my gosh, the first time we've had a self-proclaimed street urchin in the vault.
This was a phase, Dennis.
Reformed, evolved. Yes.
But my head was shaved. I had a nose ring, which wasn't wildly popular in the 90s. So I walked up to her and I said, "Where can I find books by this guy?" And she said, "Right over here, I'll take you over." And it was like it was the easiest conversation in the world. And she, pointed me to the section.
I'm glad you asked. She probably thought, thank you for asking.
Absolutely.
Let me take you to the books. Yeah.
Learned how to use the card catalog. And she said, "You're welcome to stay here and read, but if you want to take the book home, I can just show you how to get a card and you can take it home for a couple of weeks." And I was just like, what? That's how this works? You're trying to make it easy for me to take things out of this place.
Amazing.
But that's what I did. I went there and I read and I read and I read and I read. And I kind of rediscovered this lifeline that I knew so well as a kid. But yeah, Altoona Public Library.
That letter.
Where it was at. Yep.
That's going to be a letter. It's
yes,
going to be a letter.
100. Yeah. Thank you for doing this because that reminds me.
Wow.
30 years later, I'm definitely going to do that.
It's never too late for a letter.
Absolutely.
Never too late.
Yep.
And so you rediscovered during your gap year that the library was a sanctuary.
For sure.
Sorts. Yep. And did you start feeling better about yourself, like your self-esteem and self-worth start to increase a little bit? Or was it more just like neutralizing?
I wanted to be part of a world where I could have this feeling.
Wow.
And where I could join other worlds and learn about things that were happening in other parts of the world. And it opened up a whole new way of thinking for me.
Okay.
And that's when I really started to wonder, well, what could I actually do with myself? What's in store for me? What could I do? And my piano teacher, once again, he said, "What are you reading right now?" And it was a book by Charles Bukowski. He said, "Well, where's he?" And I said, "Well, he's dead now, but he lived in Los Angeles." Before I mentioned that he was dead, he said, "Well, I'm going to buy you a bus ticket and you're going to take a bus out there and you're going to find this guy and learn from him." And I mean, of course, I wasn't going to do that because Bukowski died in 92 or 94, but the fact that he said that, an adult that I trusted and respected said that, it made it seem like, oh, I can do things. I can actually buy a bus ticket and go somewhere.
So it wasn't just the validation that he believed that you were worth it. You realized that you were worth making the decision for. You had that ability, that autonomy.
And there was no reason why I couldn't have done that right there in that moment, or I couldn't have done it last week. It was what that introduced me to the idea that I could be empowered to think outside what I knew and proactively explore something that I was really interested in. And it was after a conversation with my dad where he said, you have a cousin in Pittsburgh who's a muralist. He's a really successful artist. He makes beautiful murals all over the country. They have schools where they teach you that and you can learn art. And I was like, oh, well, I can draw. Maybe I could go to a school that teaches art. So I did. I went to DC and I enrolled in art school there.
Did you look at many schools, or did you?
I looked at one school, and that's where I went. And I very quickly threw together a portfolio of photorealistic drawings, many of which were on lined paper because that was the paper that I had access to, and I presented those to the Corcoran in DC, and they admitted me.
And they admitted you.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you received that letter or that notification?
Oh, it was. I can't even describe it. I mean, it was just this possibility that I'd never even considered, that I was going to move to DC and I was going to, who knew what I was going to do? And that was the exciting part, is that the drawing was like a window into this other world. I didn't even then really think, well, I want to draw for the rest of my life. I mean, it was like a fun hobby and a discipline, but it was a point of entry to some other possibility.
I was thinking about the word discipline, that you use that word with a bit of emphasis.
Oh, yeah. That was the thing that I really feel like I taught myself that got me kind of out of that pit. And it was just the discipline of saying, okay, if you get up at 10 instead of 8:30, you can still get back on track. You can make your bed. You can go downstairs and you can make, it was still, I could still pick up those tasks that I had set out for myself.
Did anybody say to you, Jenny, like along the way, like, I see you kind of moving along, kid? Or did you just keep moving along?
I kept moving along, but I think there was a collective sense of like,
she's moving.
Yeah. She's
changing.
We knew that this is where she should have been. And now she's on her way.
When you look back at that a bit and you think of anything that might surprise you about your capacity to get through something that might be like, Dante's Inferno of sorts, like layers of hell or whatever it might be. Just a tough walk, right? Just a tough, fiery walk. Does anything surprise you?
Well, I think it surprised me that no longer scared me. I tended to, and I still do, and it's obvious if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, it's all over the place. I'm not afraid of unfamiliar situations. And I think that it just came from establishing this practice of how to approach an unfamiliar situation, because I'm always going to be afraid. There's always going to be fear. There's always going to be insecurity. But I can move through that by having this discipline of taking steps down this path and sort of divorce myself from those feelings of fear, because I know that that's recipe for disaster, is to succumb to fear.
It almost sounds like you've learned to, and jump in at any point after I utter this, what I think might be an insight. Like instead of, I think when you're out of balance, right? Anybody is out of balance. Like, for instance, exploration can pull you way out of balance because you can explore and get into patterns. And, it's like, well, I have a new pattern, but the pattern is not the right stuff. Like, I'm patterning myself in a way that I didn't even realize I was doing, but I need organization to pattern me. But the exploration's out of balance. Like, I got myself into some stuff, whatever the stuff is, driving too fast, doing the wrong things, hanging with the wrong people, whatever it is. But it seems like you've learned to kind of pull that application of exploration to chunk it so that you're like checking yourself in the context. You're like kind of like left, right, we're good. Boom, next. But you kind of preset those steps or notes and then play them with a little bit more, not caution, but it's like vigilance or self-check-in, self-monitoring-ish style. Is that kind of what you're doing?
I think what's most important to me is recognizing what I have, what's working in my favor, and starting there.
Okay.
What is a step that I can take right now in this second? Okay, and then take that step. Okay, now what? Now what's the next step? It's working with what I have in order to chip away at that uncertainty or whatever the barrier is. I am not a visionary. I don't have a big dynamic vision for myself or for anything. But what I do have is the discipline to not let those kinds of barriers deter me from something that I feel like could be meaningful or is important. I mean, in fact, that's, I unintentionally wore this shirt today, but
tell us what that shirt says.
It says "The way out is through,"
Mm-hmm.
and it's from a Robert Frost poem. But it just, I saw the shirt, it resonated, I wore it.
Perfect.
Because it is. It's you just got to push through.
You just have to push through.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I didn't know this was the conversation that
well, there are so many catchphrases, right? People toss our way on social media. Some of them are I think most of them are quite well intentioned. But when you hear the fuller story path of someone's life, right, you kind of go, wow, like I can see how you have appreciation for other people's perspectives, because it's not like, oh, there's Jenny Wright. She was an artist who then, classic pianist, all true, ended up at MASS MoCA somehow, and now is running a nonprofit. Like there was this like, sometimes those gap years are so informative because they ground you and they teach you a bit of what your, whether you call it your psyche or your essence is capable of, and how to convert what it's capable of in a way that's contextually appropriate, relevant, and in service to the world and yourself, right? And if it's in service to the world, it should be in service to yourself. There should be that syntony there. It shouldn't be like there's this, it's like, good companies, by the way, what's good for the company is usually good for the customer, right? When the self, capital S, is like the ultimate customer, you've got to be, it's not like, you shouldn't be, and all my Roman Catholic, Irish friends, I apologize for saying this, but, the cross isn't yours to carry, right? That was done. So you don't have to do that all the time. You'll carry it and you'll go through things and you'll have firewalks. But you really, if it's good for the world and it should be good for you. And if it's good for you, it should be good for the world.
Wow. That's deep.
Yeah. Well, you brought me there, so thank you. So here we are. You go to school in D.C., right?
Yeah.
You're drawing on, they admitted you, despite the fact that you used loose leaf paper.
Oh, yeah.
You just go do it.
Not a well thought out presentation.
Doesn't matter if it's good or capable of waking people up.
It was good enough.
Do it. It was good enough. So you did that. Now you're in school. Do you have internships or anything that?
I did. My first internship was at a huge architecture firm. And, I was bartending in DC at the time, and a woman came in. She had a birthday party. We got to talking, and she had a few too many drinks, and she said, "Would you say you study again?" I said, "Graphic design." She's like, "Well, that's basically the same as architecture, right?" And I said, "Well, not really, but I mean, you draw." And she said, "Well, I want to introduce you to my boss. You should come in and interview." And I thought, why on earth would anyone want me to work in an architecture firm? But I went in and I met her boss and, had a great conversation and showed some drawings of photorealistic things that I had done.
The rabbit.
Well, it wasn't the rabbit in this case. It was actually hand-drawn type with a rapidograph pen. So hand-drawn letter forms that were extremely precise. And this was still at a time when there were some purists in the architecture world who didn't believe in using computers yet. They were still drawing by hand.
Okay.
And he said, you know what? I think it's really impressive that you did that. I don't know what you're going to do here, but why don't you come onto the team for the summer? And so I got a summer internship at this firm, which was...
Was it a big firm?
Huge firm. Probably a couple thousand employees. They were actually based in Omaha, Nebraska, but the sort of biggest office was in DC. So I had exposure to all kinds of, creative projects, site visits, just access to people who were so extraordinarily talented and whatever it was that they were doing, model building, like just all kinds of really exciting projects. And that sort of opened up a whole new world of possibility, because now I'm in this business. I'm in this professional side. I took out my nose ring. Like I was dressing like a professional.
You grew hair on your head.
I grew hair. Hair.
That's a big deal, Jenny. Come on.
And I had no problem with that.
Did you have a scrunchie at the time? Because that was like Scrunchieville time.
Scrunchie
right?
on the wrist. Yeah, it was always 150 degrees outside, so I'd use it. And then because men were still wearing suits in offices, I'd take it back off and put my sweater on when I get back in the office. But no, it was an incredible opportunity. And in fact, it was that creative director who introduced us to the Berkshires, because we were thinking about, I got married in 2005, and I was still in touch with this creative director. And he said, my brother has a firm in the Berkshires. And we thought, oh, what are those? Those sound nice. And that's what brought us here. But just in terms of, maintaining that connection from that very first internship.
Oh my gosh.
Is how we ended up here ultimately.
And did you move to Pittsfield or South County or North County when you arrived?
We live in Pittsfield. We've been there since 2006.
Oh my gosh. For a while.
Yeah.
Almost 20 years.
Exactly. I know, it's hard to believe.
Oh my gosh. And how long did you stay doing architectural related support, teamwork?
Yeah, I was with that firm for about 4 years. And the great thing about that opportunity is that they offered me a full-time job. So I was probably I had just started my junior year of college in the graphic design program when the firm said, we are about to do a full rebrand of the entire company. We're working with a marquee designer. We want you to be part of that effort. We want you to be part of the implementation. And I thought, well, I can't pass this up. Like I'm going to take a pause on school so that I can do this and learn everything I can. And it was just the most fortunate, phenomenal experience professionally, I think, that I've ever had, just to sort of fall into that role and then be able to work with these extraordinarily talented people on this project that was really something that I thought that I wanted to do more of, which is kind of big systemic design.
Big system. I was just going to ask you, how would you retitle that if you had a folder, digital or old school, and you were to write down what this project was?
It was a brand identity system.
Yeah. Okay.
So it wasn't just a logo. It was all of the working documents that people in the company would use. And that all came from sitting down with them and talking to them and watching how they worked and what they needed and where they were struggling, and understanding what tools could we build into the system that would help people do what they're good at, so that they weren't having to constantly deal with these, PowerPoint issues or whatever.
So brand is pre-Canva,
yes.
Brand identity is everything from logos, and people think of logos and sort of marketing, but it really is the essence of the company, right? It's like its soul or ethos. Does it come across? Does it convey? What are the archetypes? What does it say about this group? From an imaging standpoint, how much do you think? Yeah, jump in, just go. I feel you want to jump in, so let's do
it. I mean, well, what was interesting about this is that because it was an architecture firm, the underlying grid system was the most profound design element, yet it was invisible. So we didn't show the lines that the type was aligned to, but it was such an important part of how the whole system would set up. And, I could get into the weeds and we could have 10 more episodes of this podcast of me talking about grid systems, which, by the way, I wrote my thesis on.
Oh, boy. Oh,
So
boy.
I didn't stop there. But it was just such an interesting introduction to me to how systems, large-scale systems, come from, but also influence individual behavior.
Okay.
So we knew almost immediately after we rolled out the system where there were going to be challenges, because sometimes some of these tools that we design them for us. We design them for like the power user who really cares about, finessing type. And it was just too fussy for an architect who needed to get their job done to deal with.
So for the non-architect,
Yeah.
the tools would be A, B, C, go.
Construction drawing templates, proposal templates, email signatures, little minutia like that.
Everything.
But the actual materials that people use to present their work.
Fonts, colors.
Oh, yeah.
Everything, the whole brand identity kit.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
But we didn't just provide the standard and say, here are the instructions for how you do this. We did build the documents themselves and then roll them out to people. So they just could plug and play in theory.
It was like Mad Libs, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put your design here.
Yeah, and you can create your own story. We're just giving you the framework.
Okay,
We're not imposing that on.
But that's more than what most brand identity kits are.
Generally,
it's more of
I think,
system.
Yeah, I think now it's probably changing because there are so many user-friendly tools that are almost meant to kind of bypass that. But back in the day, it was you would get your logo and your color palette and your instructions, and then somebody inside the company would sort of build what they needed to those specs. But we did that.
Biggest learning through this was what?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Honestly, for me personally, selfishly, the biggest learning was that I can do hard things.
Okay.
I mean,
that's a really hard thing too. I mean, this is thousands of people work for the firm that you were at in DC, and it had a relationship with the Berkshire firm.
Well, we didn't know. I didn't know anything about that yet.
Okay.
Ultimately, that's how we ended up here. But at the time, I was a glorified intern.
Okay.
And I was talking to the CEO of this firm and talking to his head of marketing about making recommendations. And
This is critical. This is critical. You were an intern.
Yeah.
And you're going to a CEO. Same person who was like, I have to create the structure to get out of bed by 8:30, make my bed, feed myself. And now you're being looked at as being, you're better than, right? This is what your piano teacher said. You're better than that. Now you're being better than probably, who cares what someone thought you could be or could not be, but you're better than the average intern. Let me tell you that right now, right? Because you're just rolling. How cool is it? Let me just say that you felt so much self-efficacy in that relationship that you could just say and do things. Was that like, did you feel that when you were doing that? Like, hey, like not like, oh, reverent CEO, but like more, hey, wow, this is cool. Like, I'm just doing stuff. This is what I'm good at doing. I got stuff under control. I can do hard things. Like, en route to saying I could do hard things, did you feel anything that you could share with us? I
think if I had said that to myself back in the day, I would have been paralyzed with fear and insecurity.
So you just keep doing stuff.
It was just, I knew what the job was. I knew what the goal was. And I knew that in order to facilitate the best possible outcome, I needed this person, who happened to be the CEO, but he was a person with decision-making ability. I needed him to believe it. I needed him to believe that that was the right decision. And so through that lens, it didn't matter to me who the person was because I knew what I needed to do. I knew what my role was and I knew what the goals were. And so it was really it was having a conversation with all kinds of different people, but it was really not that much different from sitting down with an architect, again, whose job I didn't know at all, and just asking them a bunch of questions and learning. And
which, ironically, is what you're doing today.
Exactly. Yeah.
roles, goals, and incremental movement towards ultimate outcomes, informed by questions, appreciative inquiry, with no directionality, no force. I mean, I experienced this when we were having one of our conversations, which I know I had to remind you was on the bike path when you texted me that day and you said, hey, come again, what's that? And I'm like, yeah, that day that we spoke for like it was going to be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It was like 50 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had to get some activity, physical. I need to move. And usually I'm up really early running or doing something. And I took my bike out because I said, I got to just do this now. I've been on Zooms for, quite a long time that particular day. And it was so refreshing to be with you. Move, like, even though I was moving, I think you eventually got in your car and said, I need to get out of my office and I need to move too. But I felt as though you were doing that really gentle questioning, respecting what I was giving you about a project that we had contributed to together, and that you were really just organizing the way people could interconnect. And actually, now that I think of it, you were almost composing music or an illustration of what a perfect version of everyone's contribution could look like on paper.
That's funny because I'm going to take you back to 5th grade, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So I was on this team, and I've told various groups of interns this story before, but have you ever heard of Odyssey of the Mind?
Odyssey of the Mind.
Yeah. So that was a huge deal when I was in 5th grade. I was on a team that had to build a balsa wood structure that would hold weight, and we had to write and perform a skit that we would do simultaneously.
Okay.
So we go to regionals, we do our skit's over. I look over and they're still putting weight on the structure, and they keep putting weight and they keep putting weight. Finally it breaks, but we ended up breaking some sort of weight holding record for this balsa wood structure project. And we won. And we, went back to school, and there was a big celebration with parents. And our coach, who was the 5th grade teacher at the time, she had the unfortunate name of Mrs. Bossy. It's a tough name for 5th grade.
Like Bossy.
Bossy is how it's spelled.
She's bossy, as they say in Boston. Boss. She's so bossy.
She was fantastic, but she went through each kid on the team and identified what did they bring to the team that made us extraordinary as a group. She went through kid by kid.
This was like after the win.
After the big win.
After the big win.
Yeah. And this just felt like, okay, this is a moment. Like she's going to say something amazing about me. And she goes through every kid. And, Elizabeth, who hosted all the meetings and all the practices, she was the leader. Okay. And she, continues to be a leader. And she's going down the list, and she gets to me. And of course, she says amazing things about each kid. And you look at them and you're like, of course, you're going to be an engineer someday, Kurt. And she gets to me, I'm last. And she said, Jenny was the glue. And I just sort of sat there like, what the hell is that?
5th grade. I don't want to be there was no such thing as Gorilla Glue back then. Even that would be cool glue.
And she went on to elaborate, which actually made it kind of worse in the moment, which was, Jenny, just by her presence, brings out the best in the people around her.
Did you just say that was worse? That was not worse. That's
no 10-year-old wants to hear that.
All right.
Just show up and everybody else is going to be awesome.
Right.
That was not the message that I wanted to receive on that particular day. And I resented that for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I was like, no, I'm going to bring it. There's something super special about me, and I just haven't found it yet. But I thought about that all the time. There's this sort of passivity that I interpreted from that comment that I was just not okay with. So,
do you think it was really passivity at the time, or do you think that you were just like, in 5th grade? But regardless, it seems like you've made some changes based on that.
Well, 20 years later, I had my first creative director role. It was the first time that I ran a team. And when the CEO told me, I'm promoting the current creative director to VP, I want you to be creative director, I thought, yay.
By the way, just so everyone knows, being a creative director is a big deal.
It's a big deal. It's a giant, exalted sounding title, but it's a huge deal.
I know, but we've coached a few CEOs, and when they bring somebody, when they finally decide on a creative director, they think they wrangle with it for a while. They don't just say, "Oh, we're going to bring in Allison to be the creative director." It's like I've been on the other side of this as an executive coach, and let me tell you, it is a long conversation. It's not one. It's several, it's assessments, it's rethinking and how are they going to work with folks, team dynamics, how do they work across leadership? They have to be part of the leadership team. So anyway, back to your appointment.
Well, I was feeling all of that weight. Whether that happened or not, I received that message with the weight associated with it. And I thought, oh my God, like I can't fake this one. I mean, I was going to be leading people who had so much more experience than I did, experts in their field. I mean, we had a photographer who used to be Martha Stewart's photographer. We had stylists. I was working for a lifestyle brand at the time, stylists who worked for major brands. So there was no chance that I was going to fake it till you make it. That I needed a different approach. And I was like, all right. So I called a meeting with the team. I think the team was 12 at the time. And I said, hi, I'm Jenny. I've worked with you guys, but I don't really know specifically what you do. So I'd really love to just go around and hear from you. Like, what does your best day look like when you are doing your job and knocking it out of the park? Just like describe to me what it is that you do. And so they did that. And then I asked a follow-up and I said, well, would you say you do that every day? And very quickly, everybody just laughed at the question.
Sure.
And they said, absolutely not. No. And so I said, well, why do you think that is? Like, what's keeping you from that? And nobody said anything for a few seconds. And one of it was like junior stylist spoke up and she said, well, nobody really knows what we do. And so when she said that, the whole group just kind of erupted. And they were like, yeah, no one appreciates the work that goes into lighting a shot, building a set, styling it. It was just, there's so much that goes into it that I didn't even know. But she nailed it when she said that. And so, we wrapped up the meeting. It was the weekend. But that was on my mind. And so I went in that Saturday to move into my new office. And I went to the server where they had all their photos. And we were using a project management software called Trello at the time with this very visual. Mm-hmm. So I put all those photos into Trello. And I sent a company-wide email that just introduced myself and said, hey, I'm a new creative director. I can't wait to work with you. Here's a sample of what the team has been working on for the last month, just so that you guys know what we do. And, can't wait to meet you. And then I sort of forgot about it, went home for the day. And so I came in on Monday. There was a standing staff meeting. And I checked my email right before I got to the studio. And I was like, oh no. I had like 35 emails in response to that company-wide message that I had sent out. And I was like, what have I done? I've just opened the door to like everybody providing all of their helpful feedback. But I read the first one and it was from the head of sales. And he said, oh my God, I had no idea that we did this work in-house. I had no idea. This is stunning. I can't wait to show it to my customers. Like, thank you for sending. And I was like, that was nice. And so I went to the next one and it was from a guy who worked in the warehouse. And he said, it's so cool to see where all this stuff goes. Like, all I see are boxes. It's really nice to connect it to what it actually is and what it looks like. And it was 35 messages of that. It was people just kind of gobsmacked at how beautiful this work was. So I was like, oh, great. I can't wait to talk about this with the team. And I walked in and there's nobody there. I thought, oh, where is everybody? And I noticed that they were in the corner of the other studio, gathered around the photographer's monitor, because he had the biggest monitor, and they were reading these reply alls. They were all reading them as a team, and they were like, oh man, you really nailed it. Look at that raking light, look at that. And the crown molding, it's perfect. So going over those details in the back of my mind, I'm like, you guys shot these. Like, you are the ones, in fact, who did this. Like, none of this should come as a surprise. But they were re-looking at their own work with the benefit of this feedback and recognizing how incredibly talented they were. And I was like, I'm not going into this room. I'm not touching this moment. I'm just going to stand here and watch. And literally in that moment, and I know this sounds totally hokey, I thought of Mrs. Bossy, and I was like, okay, touche.
Touche.
This I can do. I don't have the charisma. I don't necessarily have the big vision, but this feels right. I can understand what people are good at, and I can help them continue to be good at it.
Thank you, Mrs. Bossy. Thank you, Mrs. Bossy. I love
There's
this.
another letter number 2 I need to write.
Yeah. Wow. I'm thinking about when we were on that call together and how you were sorting through what was the best contribution of each partner.
Yep.
And I experience now, rethinking it, probably how those folks thought, because you were finding things in Drury High School, North Adams Public Schools, finding things that were a part of the ecosystem here, but held by a particular partner like MCLA or the Berkshire Innovation Center, and you were doing it in a way that you were open, you were organized, and you were discerning. And it was like, she's really being an objective observer, some enthusiasm, but it's not false enthusiasm. It's informed by her knowing, discerning and analyzing what the contributions, but how they fit together. And in fact, much like a musical composition, but the notes are scattered and you have to figure out how to arrange them to play to an audience that's waiting for some decent sound.
That's really interesting. And I think a lot of it too comes from the fact that I'm new to this. And I think there's a benefit from seeing something for the first time and recognizing how incredible it is. Like there's a program that's across the Berkshires. It's called Portrait of a Graduate. I'm sure you know about it. I went to this presentation and saw students from different high schools talk about the engagement work that they had done and the leadership work that they had done. And I was like, oh my God, these kids are amazing.
My son's actually on that, is doing that work at BART. Actually.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's an incredible program. And I also have worked directly with students from the arts management internship and,
at MCLA.
At MCLA,
yes.
yeah. And those are the students that, are thriving in
awesome.
Arts leadership roles. And I have an intern right now at the partnership who's come through the arts management program, fantastic. And he's brilliant. But just in that way of being a generalist, but being creative and understanding how different disciplines work together. And there's just a je ne sais quoi about that program. Yeah. And because I'm coming at this sort of seeing a lot of these things for the first time, it's like seeing all these beautiful, shiny things. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. And that's amazing. And what if we put them together?
Well, but that's it.
And that's what that conversation was.
And then when you rearrange the notes, that's when you're an arranger catalyst, because you're using creativity, even though it doesn't seem like you're creating, but you're grabbing someone else's stuff, but you're reorganizing. First, you're acknowledging the thing that they can give that's the best give. Okay, we're going to grab this from this school, that from that agency or CBO or nonprofit. And that's the real conjuring that needs to happen to create a thriving community. There is some developmental work that you're really responsible for, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it's the drab developmental work, because it's not. It requires a different set of skills.
But it's also recognizing the incredible things that are here. I think sometimes there's a tendency to say, well, if we just had that, if we just had this, or if we just had that other thing that we don't currently have. And what I've been able to do is look around and really see what the resources that we have. They might not be talking to each other. They might be working in silos, but we have incredible resources here. And if they're connected, they could become really, really powerful. And I think that sort of, for me, is just the first step.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It reminds me of when you found the library and you're like, wait, I can take a book out? So there is this naivete that we shouldn't leave behind as adults.
Absolutely.
Right? Like call it what it is. Like be an objective observer and be enthused by that thing that you see that's really good, right? And voice it to others. And then in your case, rearrange it and be like that collaborator, holist, synergist, sort of alchemist and go, kapow, this is the goods. These are the notes. Let's play.
Yeah. And I think what happens as adults is that we always feel like we have to know the answer. We have to show up knowing the answer. And what I've learned is that it's so fun to not know the answer and to be able to ask questions and be able to genuinely be enthusiastic about things that you don't know. Yeah. Like I think adults, we feel like not knowing something is scary and destabilizing. But it's like, oh no, it's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, not yet, right? I don't know about it yet, but I need you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I want to learn. Tell me all about it. What do you think?
Also, let's presume some positive intent from another. That's the lesson I'm getting from you too, right? Like, I'm going to presume positive intent that the other is here to really contribute because I have evidence. I have that evidence, me, Jenny, right here from this person, that person. And that's so critical that you bring that energy to the work you're doing. Now, at this point in the podcast, we shift just a little bit because we're there. And boy, I could have another episode or two with you. I'm really having fun. Are you having fun?
I'm just like a 5-minute walk away. So anytime.
That's great. That's true. We're on campus together here at MASS MoCA. So, these questions, I'll give them. And I know you've heard other episodes, but it's always different when you're getting the question. Towards the end, I like to ask these questions, 3. The first is, Jenny Wright, what were you raised for? The second is, what do you want to be known for? And the third is, Jenny Wright, what are you doing about it now? So we'll go back to the first. Jenny, what were you raised for?
What was I raised for? I think I was raised to be curious. I think that's just kind of why I showed up.
Yeah, right on. What do you want to be known for?
I think if I'm being honest, I want to be known for consistency. And that sounds boring, but I guess what I mean by that is that I had the same conversation. I had the same level of respect. I had the same energy in no matter who I was talking to. Because I think sometimes we all put on different masks for different occasions. And I want to try to be genuinely curious and authentic no matter what the situation is. And I think that's probably it. Yeah, she said this thing and then she followed through. She said this thing and she believed the same thing the next time I talked to her.
Wow. Okay.
Consistency.
Yeah. Consistency with sparkles around it. Okay, good. What are you doing about it now to make sure that you're known for this phenomenally bold-faced consistency so that when people meet you again and again, they know they can rely on you? What are you doing about it now in particular in the work that you're doing?
Specifically in the work that I'm doing. So I'm surrounded by planning studies all the time. Planning studies are fantastic, but they're very high level and they're abstract. And I think that I want to make sure that I understand to the extent that I'm able the impact that any decision that I might make has on an individual person. Because any kind of systems design is about the people that interact with the systems. And so even though, yes, I consider myself to be an introvert, I want to make sure that anything I do is grounded in an experience of an individual living and working or whatever the circumstance is, but that it's grounded in people's lived experience.
Amazing. And you're doing that sort of reminding to yourself all the time.
Yeah. It's not just a bridge, Dennis.
It's not just a bridge. It's not just a bridge, Dennis. Okay, I got it. So this has been an incredibly enriching conversation for me, and I'm sure for many others. because your career path and your story path and your life work narrative isn't just about one thing. It's about a lot of things that have contributed to your capacity to be curious in ways that involve engaging others, right? And in such a capacity that they're able to have their best sort of like talent show up in memory of Mrs. Bossy. I love it. Mrs. Bossy 2.0. I'm glad you're here for the ride. It was awesome conversation today, Jenny. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Glad you're here to curate the next chapters of North Adams and all the institutions, agencies, and people that are influenced and impacted by what good systems can do for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Every story matters. I'm convinced. And what matters to you matters to us and to the guests you just heard from. So please drop your insights, realizations, and takeaways in the comment section below. Give us a like, and also maybe even share with a friend or colleague or family member who could benefit from listening to this story. That's it for now. Dr. Dennis Rebelo signing off from my Story Vault.